Hi, I'm Wes Spence, retired Navy SEAL captain and proud employee of CAVU International, and this is Scar Tissue. We are currently filming in beautiful Lake Havasu City, Arizona, and you can see the world-famous London Bridge behind me. But this is also the home of our first two guests that you will see and a couple of our upcoming podcasts. Now, this video will serve as an introduction to Scar Tissue, what it is, what you can expect, and why we believe it will be a valuable addition to anyone's podcast must-see lineup. So, why did we name the show Scar Tissue? Well, the term scar tissue is often used in the military as a slang term to describe someone's experience level. For example, think of the comment like, "That senior enlisted leader is outstanding. She's earned a lot of scar tissue in her field of work, and she can share that scar tissue with her troops." Basically, you can think of scar tissue as hard lessons learned. So, what is our mission? Well, we seek out and interview unique guests from around the world, guests who have lived a life, and most importantly, have stories to tell. Well, hello, welcome to Scar Tissue. I'm your host, Wes Spence, and today is our first ever episode of Scar Tissue. Now, we got a great guest for you today, Master Chief Retired SEAL Lu Lastra. Now, I want to be fully open with everybody. Lu is not only an amazing SEAL, a legend in our community, he's also a great teammate and a personal friend. And even better disclosure, we were discussing, now I'll do one story about Lu before I talk about his amazing accomplishments, and then we'll get into the interview. But one great story about Lu and our relationship and how it was built. When I took over command, Advanced Training Command back in 2006, I'm doing the usual thing in my office, basically gripping the desk and doing 360s on my office chair. And I hear a little noise at the door. Now, one thing about Lu that he has a great dog by the name of Bert. And Bert was a puppy at this time. And when I heard the noise, looked over there, and there's Bert as a young puppy sitting there on my doorstep. And I go, oh, what a great looking dog. And Bert took one look at me, turned his back on me, and evacuated his entire bowels right onto my office floor. And then, of course, Lu came in and goes, oh, that's not cool. And that is how I met Lu. And we have been best friends ever since, great teammates. And yeah, a lot of great stories have gone down the pike since then. So in all seriousness, though, some of the things that you need to be aware of Lu before we get into the interview. One, he was born in Cuba, raised in Orange County, entered the SEAL teams in 1982, where he served for over 30 years. He was also one of the youngest, or actually the youngest guy ever recruited into SEAL Team 6. He's also a world record holder skydive champion. He was in the Olympic trials for cycling. And he, to this day now, really spends his time with his lovely wife, Maureen, out here in Lake Havasu City, mentoring people, young kids up to adults, and really just giving back to the community. So without further ado, Lu, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Wes. It's great to see you again. Obviously, it brings back a lot of good memories.
Yeah.
Especially that one of Bert. I guess he had to let the commanding officer know how he felt. But that was Bert's last trip to the command was that week. It wasn't like my dog that I had the beagle before that had been passed away at 12. He was like, he was a person. I mean, he used to hang out in my office. The troops would come in, they'd love him. I mean, he was better behaved than most of us. But after Bert passed away, we decided to try the puppy out. And the end of the story was when he took a dump on your doorstep. It's like, okay, you ain't coming back to work anymore. But I still got him. He's 15 years old and he's doing great.
Right. The little saying is every conversation eventually turns to shit. I figured I'd start out the show that way, and then
absolutely,
then it can only go up at that point.
There's
right?
a lot of analogies that are related to shit that are actually pretty darn good. And I might even actually use a couple of them during our talk today.
Outstanding. So yeah, let's get into it. Right. So let's start at the beginning. Little Lu was born in Cuba and went to Orange County. Tell me some stuff that happened back in those days and it kind of stayed with you through the rest of your life.
Yeah. So the interesting thing, obviously my parents went to school in the U.S. They were there when Castro took over, supported Castro initially, like so many Cubans did, and then started to understand that wasn't what they were about. And when Castro started taking things over with socialism and taking over, both my parents' families had prominent businesses, which became the governments. And then my parents both, started working the route to legally come to the U.S. So we ended up basically, my dad ended up probably serving almost 3 years in a, for lack of a better term, concentration camp for Castro, when he, basically declared that he wasn't exactly about the government till we had our visas to come over to the United States in 1968. So it was that's the beginning, was basically coming to the United States, and at the age of 5 with my sister that's a year and a half younger than me, and my parents, and we stopped in Miami one night and then directly into the Los Angeles area, and that's where I ended up growing up in Orange County. But
What brought you to Los Angeles? What actually
we
took you there?
had, so our sponsor at the
Mm.
time was in Glendale, so that's where, when we went over, that we had the, relatives already in the U.S. in the Los Angeles Orange County area. So I grew up, completely Americanized immediately. I mean, I got here and didn't speak a lick of English, and I really cannot remember um, anything about not knowing the language of this country, other than my mother and dad would always tell us, when we're outside the house, we speak English because it's the language of this country, and it's impolite to speak anything but that. But then, that being said, at home they wanted us to, obviously remember our heritage, and continue to, get us to try to speak in Spanish to remember our Spanish. But I really, it was like, almost, I can't really remember like going to school and not knowing how to speak the language. It's, you're a kid, you pick it up so quick. So I got Americanized and grew up
Yeah.
in Orange County, doing all the stuff that American kids do, and
Mhm.
I could tell you more on leading on to the rest of my life, but
Yeah.
that's about it, the Cuba part.
Yeah, I remember when you and I talk a lot back in the day, and I remember one of the things that stuck with me is how different Orange County was back then. You were talking about dove hunting or quail hunting, in the in what's now utterly urbanized
Yeah.
development. What are some of the other things there? Or give me like one or two things that
So
kind of stuck with you.
yeah, so we
Before
would still,
Yeah.
my dad loved to hunt and do things like that. So we would actually have to go out a little bit, usually like to Corona and Riverside and places like
Yeah.
that. Orange County was already somewhat developed,
Yeah.
but so the things I did in Orange County that I loved doing was, I loved to ride skateboards
Yep.
from,
Yep.
from day one. Grew up around that whole scene, and and ride my bicycles. I was into BMX,
Right.
and and then the team sports. Obviously some of them were soccer. Grew up playing soccer, and also grew up swimming, doing AAU stuff. But just played baseball, little league. I think I played a couple of seasons of Pop Warner football.
Yeah.
So I was always kind of actively engaged in some sport, or one sport or another, and obviously shooting because my dad loved that. I got into that.
Mhm.
And then a friend of my father's at around the age of 13 got me into bass fishing, which I still, I live here in Lake Havasu City, and I fish a couple of times a week. And that's another one of the things that I do, from the extreme stuff I like to still do to, just going and catching a fish. Though my bass boat will do 80 miles an hour.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's,
You gotta hurry to the spot.
yeah,
You gotta
exactly.
beat them to the
Exactly.
spot. And so big thing for you obviously was BMX growing up. So what got you into BMX? And because we were talking about a minute ago, we'll get into it. You re-entered it at the age of 50. So what got you into BMX, and what kind of gave you the hook into that?
So it was really pretty natural. It was kind of an organic thing, and that's what kids did back then. Is we rode our bikes. We were ready to,
Yeah.
and man, as soon as your parents would let you out of the house in the morning, yeah, I was out the front door going to find my friends, and we would go everywhere on our bicycles. We would, and then we would started building different tracks and dirt, and type jumps, and it was really at the beginning of the whole BMX scene in Orange County.
Mhm.
So I kind of, I had the Schwinn Stingray, and then went into the other, the higher end type models with the mongooses and all that. So I kind of got to grow up in that scene, and it was just what kids were doing at that time. We didn't have smartphones, we didn't have computers, so we had to go figure out how to entertain ourselves.
Yeah, I remember. I'm sure your parents the same way. Is like, don't come home till it gets dark.
Yeah, the lights come on, the street lights come on. That was a signal that you had to head to
Yeah.
the house. Yeah.
Now, so did you get in a competition at that time, or when did you actually get in a competition? For
So I
BMX?
started racing BMX bikes to a point. My parents, they also had me doing team sports and things like that. So
Yeah.
it was kind of a trade off on how much I was going to get to do. If it was up to me, I would have been doing it every day of the week.
Yeah.
But I could only go out and race when my my parents had, afforded the time and took me out to do that. And immediately I could pick up things and pretty coordinated. So I picked up on it and it would do pretty well with it. But I just enjoyed being on a bicycle. I mean, I think it's just, I wasn't really thinking about it. It was just, when I wasn't doing school and, done with my homework, the first thing I would do is get on my bike and head on out and work on my bikes and try to not mess things up too bad. But,
Yep.
so all that stuff that just, or if it wasn't that, it was on a skateboard, so the beginning of that stuff on the Santa Ana riverbed. And a lot of the kids that, are famous for the history of that were maybe 3 to 5 years older than me at the time. So I grew up around a lot of the heroes of the initial the inception of the sport was skateboards and BMX. But I always enjoyed,
Yeah. So you had
getting
a
at it.
lot of probably implied mentorship, just or examples. I should say for
Oh, absolutely.
that you
Yeah,
could.
I've had mentorship all my
Yeah.
entire life,
Yeah.
though for so much of my life I'd never actually heard the word mentorship.
Right.
But it was. I mean, mentorship is natural,
Mhm.
as we all should know, that it's, you can't tag somebody as a mentor. You can try to tag somebody as a mentor, but if that
Right.
person that you're assigning that mentor to, if they aren't looking at that person like I truly want to be like that person because they lead by example and all that, it just won't be that effective. So a lot of the mentorship is natural on people that do great things and you want to emulate, you want to be as good as. So a lot of that happened naturally growing up. I was always looking for somebody to teach me something or trying to take it in, and how do I do that and how can I be better at things.
Was there anybody specifically you want to kind of dime out, if you will, growing up that was a mentor, or a couple of folks that you might want to?
When it comes to like the fishing stuff,
Yeah.
and my a friend of my dad's, close friend of my dad's back then, that he was also a hunter, but
Mhm.
he liked to bass fish. And a gentleman by the name of Ed Phelps. And so Ed got me into the bass fishing, and taught me how to catch a bass using a lure, and had a Skeeter Wrangler bass boat at the time with a 150, with was cutting edge at the time.
Right.
So now looking at where I'm at, I think a lot of the background on the fishing side I owe to Ed. Obviously, a lot of the stuff with the hunting I owe to my dad.
Mhm.
My dad was vicious, and nobody. Uh, there wasn't a bud instructor that could probably hold a candle to him. So when I got the SEAL training, it wasn't as bad as, the approach to the instructors wasn't that bad to me because I had been around it my entire life. My dad always expected excellence from me, but now looking back at it, it's probably one of the biggest reasons why I was able to build the mentality and the resiliency I had to become a SEAL.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, got you established as a normal American kid, right? And so,
Absolutely.
as you're moving through life, all of a sudden you bump into a Navy recruiter, right? Tell me about the story. Why you even stopped? What the guy said to you, and where did that lead you?
Yeah. So the interesting thing I always say, after 35 years of being a SEAL, from start to finish, never took the pedal off the gas the entire time. But what I got to tell you is it was really by coincidence, because I grew up in Orange County, never even thought about joining the military. I mean, we had Marines around, El Toro Marine Base around, and I kind of understood the military a little bit, but not to the point of this guy's going to eventually be a Navy SEAL. In fact, I never thought about joining the military. My dad had mentioned, I got to 16 years of age and was going in all different directions and into, I mean, you name it, from even though I was a good student and loved to do sports, I was also into the Orange County punk scene. So I was getting at it at 16. My dad, so my dad mentioned, hey, you might want to think about the military. And I was like, whatever. And, well, anyhow, one day I was just happened to be next to a recruiting station and decided to walk into it to see what it had to offer, totally by coincidence. And I walked in there. It was the Navy recruiter. She sat me down, said, well, here's what the Navy has to offer. And I was 17 years of age. Um, Basically, long story short, put a manual in front of me with all the rates in the Navy and said, take a look at this. And tomorrow come back and we'll talk about some of the rates and what you're interested in. So I took that manual home and went through it from front to back, and never heard the word SEAL in my life. And at the back of the manual was a one-page sliver on UDT SEAL. Explosions going off on the beach, talked about what they did, somewhat. These guys wearing, I mean, shorts that are way too small for their own good, that we're still wearing today, I'm pretty sure, the UDT trunks. And so I'm like, oh, this is interesting. So I went back the next day, and she said, well, did you find anything? And I said, yeah, a couple of things, but there's this thing back here. How do I do this UDT SEAL thing? And she looked at me. I mean, that was 130 pounds at best, 17-year-old kid. I mean, I looked like like a little kid. I was. And she's like, well, that stuff is super difficult to do. Hardly anybody makes it. I could tell she was trying to tell me, dude, this ain't for you. And that was one of my biggest drivers, was basically when people were telling you, tell a 17-year-old he can't do something, stand the heck by. Right. And so that's how it started for me, was, on the SEAL thing, and people looking at me, telling me things like, from literally telling me you're too small to be a SEAL. And every time somebody said something like that, it was just fueling the fire, because it was my driver. So almost immediately, I ended up basically signing up, ended up having to go do the ASVAB and everything. And then, within 6 months at best, I was headed on my way down to boot camp in a bus to San Diego. I had to do obviously Navy boot camp, and then and I got to boot camp, and back then you could ask to do the SEAL screening test. Right. So my company commander, I would mention it to him after a couple of weeks went by, and he just kept ignoring me, and he kept ignoring me, and finally he said, Lastra, I just don't think you're cut out to be a SEAL. And I said, it was a chief at the time. And I said, we called him sir at the, as a company commander, said, sir, they told me I would be allowed to take the screening test when I came to boot camp, and I want to take the SEAL screening test. So I guess he got tired of me bugging him. One day, he finally sent 5 of us that wanted to do the screening test out of my boot camp company. And out of those 5, the little scrawny kid was the only one that passed the screening test. So I came back to my boot camp company. It was interesting because it's probably 100 plus kids in your boot camp company, young men. And immediately, the word got around that I had, passed a SEAL screening test. And you would have thought I had to immediately become a SEAL or something. It was kind of funny because the kid you least expected, was the one that got through the screening test. And then, I started, finished boot camp, started, continued to run and do the things I had on my own. Because back then, there wasn't a lot of internet things about SEALs and all that. You had to figure it out on your own, and there wasn't hardly anything known about it. So I did, whatever it took, and I was out running and swimming and doing the things I could on my spare time. Back then, I got to see the film Men with the Green Faces. I remember seeing that. We had a motivator that actually, when I did the screening test for him, I could sometimes reach out to him. I actually would have to call him on a dial landline, and he told me kind of what I needed to do. But a lot of it was just on my own, knowing that, that these are Vietnam era, and the background of UDT. And I think maybe a little bit of ignorance of not knowing that I was so in over my head. But I was, and then, and I just was going to, but you can't quit. But you can't quit was all I ever heard. So I'm like, okay, maybe, I'm going to give this a shot, and I can't quit. Yeah. And so I ended up in training in 1981. My class started with 65 guys. It was class 118. And, a lot of wonderful mentors. And immediately I knew that, man, this is a community that I wanted to be a part of. Just the personality of the guys. And these guys were like dads to me now, because at the age I was especially. And as SEAL training started, well, let me tell you one quick story. So on the way to SEAL training, I had just finished Navy boot camp and thought a way to really have to deal with never quitting or having to live with this my whole life the rest of my life if I did, was I decided in a moment to go get an actual seal with a victory wreath that I drew up tattooed on my forearm. So I showed up with that bad boy. To training. And the other guys in my class were looking at my forearm going, dude, you will never get through with that thing on your forearm. And I almost like contemplated going out and having something put over it, whatever. And I thought to myself, okay, well, let me see. We went through 2 weeks of pre-training, which wasn't, they hadn't turned it on yet. And at that time, one of my great mentors, Roger Hayden, was actually one of my instructors, and nobody said anything. And and Roger didn't, he was running the PTs. Nobody said anything. I thought to myself, I might be good. So the first day of first phase came about, and when they turned it on, and the first day out on the grinder doing calisthenics, next thing I had jungle boots next to me, and I remember it was a Senior Chief Cressini, and I remember saying, Lastra, what is that? What is that on your arm? Is that a seal, Lastra? I said, oh, it's a porpoise. And he goes, that's not a porpoise, Lastra, that's a seal. So and all of a sudden the other jungle boots started arriving around me. I was already in the push-up position, and all the instructors are now seeing the seal on my forearm. And every day I got threatened about, if you don't make it through training, I'm going to cut that off your arm. So here I am on the grinder, jungle boots around me, all the instructors. And that's something I basically never lived down the entire training. And it would get a little bit old towards the end of each of the phases. Then the new phase would start, a new bunch of instructors. And the seal on my arm was definitely a hit the whole way through training. And the interesting thing is, it definitely, did it help me get through training? It was a crazy yes. Did it help me get through training? Yes. Because it just forced me to I made it harder on myself. And I think sometimes making it harder on myself at that age, for some reason, without even knowing it, was something that drove me.
You held yourself accountable, sounds like, because, hey, this is mine, I'm owning it, and now I'm moving on, right?
I'm going to live with this thing on my arm for forever, and it wasn't the years of lasing tattoos or any of that at that time. So I knew that it was whatever. I mean, just something that worked for me.
Right.
It was interesting watching as students started quitting. Some of the guys that that looked the part way more than I did, and all of a sudden you start seeing them vanish.
Yeah.
And every time I think I fed off of, when they disappeared, I fed off of that going. I started wondering myself, like, wow, I'm still here. And it was horrible. I mean, the training is says, obviously you've gone through it, the deal. It's words can't explain the level of it. You got to live it. I try to tell it to people all the time, but somehow, many months later, I got through third phase and graduated SEAL training. And, when I was still pretty much a kid.
Right. And you're now old enough that you were part of the UDT. It's still around, right?
Yeah, it was my first assignment was Underwater Demolition Team 12.
Right.
And and obviously everything was back then UDT SEAL. So a lot of times people try to differentiate, but truly it was UDT SEAL. It's always been, we're frogmen, frogmen first. But so my first assignment was as UDT 12, and I didn't waste a whole lot of time in making an impact. I think, my first of all, how I looked, somebody thought that somebody had dropped their kid off out the quarterdeck, first of all, because I
little Lou's here.
Yeah, exactly. Louis so I understood it right off the bat, anything I did, I had to be, performance had to be there, because the stereotype and the looks wasn't going to get me anywhere. So it was, whether it was shooting, whether it was physical stuff, always trying to be at the top, if not the top. Let my actions and let my, my performance speak for itself. That carried me, a long way, my entire career through the teams.
Yeah.
And the fact that saying that, you don't look like a Navy SEAL, though it really bothered me maybe at first when I was, a new young team guy. Later on, it actually ended up being a plus.
Absolutely.
Because I could fit in places and do things that, that I didn't stand out. So it ended up being a plus at the, down the line. And it kept me performing. I mean, it's, actions speak louder than words, and lead by example has always been my, what I was mentored to do and be like. So
UDT 12, and not there all that long, and all of a sudden this dude by the name of Dick Marcinko shows up. What happens at that point?
Yeah, so talking about making an impact at UDT 12, nobody's told us anything about that Marcinko or that anybody was going to the name SEAL Team 6. Nobody knew anything about it. You weren't supposed to know anything about it. It's kind of like I try to keep it nowadays. But the interview is kind of an entertaining story, so I'm going to tell you that.
The interview to get into the
Yeah.
organization.
So basically, here I am. At that time, I was if I was 18, getting ready to turn 19, and one of the more seasoned frogmen, SEAL, in my platoon said, "Yeah, hey, they're interviewing tomorrow for SEAL Team 6. You should go interview because you know Spanish and this and that." And I'm like, "I'm a new guy. I mean, what do you? Yeah, it's like, what are you talking about?" And he kind of explained a little bit about what they did and all that. And I'm like, "That, you know what?" I went home that night and I thought to myself, "I'm going to go interview." And all I had to do was show up that morning, at the officers' quarters there in Coronado, in the lobby, just hang out, fill out some paperwork, and just wait. And there's like probably 25 to 30 seasoned SEALs that have been, you name it, I've been around for forever doing great things. And and here comes the 18-year-old kid into the lobby. It's like I fill out the paperwork and I waited and for my chance, and I went into a room at the BOQ there, and there was Dick Marcinko with full beard, everything, and started in about the team. What do you know? And I said, "Nothing really." "What do you know about the team?" And I said, "Nothing really. I just heard you guys are the best of the best is what they tell me."
Right.
And all of a sudden, I'd like to be a part of that. And he's like, "Well, what do you got to bring to the plate? You look younger than my son." So what do you bring to the plate? "I got truck drivers. I got helicopter people that fly planes, helicopters." So he was looking at me, and I said, I learned really quick, and I speak Spanish." And he goes, "Oh, you speak Spanish? Chinga tu madre." He started saying all the swear bad words in Spanish.
Yeah, right,
you
right.
could at me, laying it on me.
Yeah.
And I looked at him, and basically I said in Spanish, "Vete para carajo," which means go to hell. And so I could tell he kind of liked that for whatever reason. And the other question he asked me was, "You got a girlfriend?" The ones I can remember was, "You got a girlfriend?" I said, "Absolutely, I got a girlfriend." He goes, "Well, what are you going to do with your girlfriend if I pick you up and take you to the East Coast?" And I looked at him. I went, "Get rid of her?" And I didn't I didn't know that what type of an impact I was going to have on him with those statements. But a couple of days later, into that week, we were at UDT 12 once again. I'm a new guy there, and after physical training in the morning, the ops officer wants to see me in his office, and he's not looking happy. And I'm like, "Oh, what'd I do?" And he walked in there. He goes, "Lastra, you've been accepted to SEAL Team 6. But I want you to know you are not going anywhere till we get at least one deployment out of you." Which was a blessing, because I actually did a deployment at SEAL Teams, at UDT 12 with the tutelage of Lieutenant Sean Pybus, Mr. P.
Right.
So one of my other great mentors.
Yep.
So, and he ended up there also with me down the line. And the writing was on the wall, and it was a blessing that kind of like the pattern. But man, people were shocked that, out of all these seasoned guys, that Marcinko picked up 2 guys during those interviews, and one of them was the 18-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And I'd like to believe, that after years of being at Team 6 and then going in there when he was at Red Cell, I always kept a great relationship with him during those early years. And he was definitely the right man to get that team off the ground, no matter what anybody says. So I've had some incredibly wonderful mentors throughout the year. And but that's how I ended up at SEAL Team 6.
Right on.
And where where obviously, I spent a little over 16 years.
Right. So this is probably a good segue. You got kind of your origins or your genesis of how you started, both in life and also in SEAL teams. So let's kind of shift thought a little bit into, we mentioned a little bit of it now, but your internal combustion, what motivates you, right? So let's talk about some of those things that makes you.
Yeah, my upbringing, obviously, tough. Definitely our upbringing. My dad expected a lot from me. That definitely helped. Then obviously SEAL training, being able to pull that off, obviously, but it gives you a lot of confidence that there's nothing you can't do. But then on the other hand, nothing comes easy either.
Right.
So, understanding that, to seek out those that are smarter than you at things you want to be good at. And that was a lot of the dev group approach there, was that, and I was at, the six stuff was, we would seek out knowledge from the best in the world at whatever it was. They weren't military guys. I mean, whether it was shooting, jumping, so I think the inside what drove me was basically the desire to be really good at whatever I did, but then understanding too that it doesn't come, overnight, and just that you're just the natural is, it only takes you so far, and
Yep.
and what are you going to do to basically, deal with failures and things like that, and being able to get past them. But
So as you're going along at SEAL Team 6, and you're in the community for a while, now you got into parachuting. Um, Talk about some of those motivating factors that you just mentioned, but how did you get to the point where you're at, basically the pinnacle of the sport, doing national championships, doing world records?
yeah, so at Team 6, they always let you, if you do personal hobbies that that benefited your work life. So I was into shooting. I
Mhm.
mean, and so I went to probably almost every single shooting school in the country,
Mhm.
and I prided myself on being uh,
Mhm.
one of the best shooters, if not the best shooter in the assault team. Um, which actually led me to the combat teams competitions. I ended up doing that 5 times, representing our country as a coach and captain at the combat teams world competitions. So shooting and SEAL related type stuff were my big things. My On my free time, when I wasn't doing obviously the SEAL physical fitness stuff, I still enjoyed getting on a bike and riding a bicycle, and had an ability to ride a bike pretty well. And it also helped clear my mind. So that's kind of what got me, was that I could actually do it pretty well. And I entered in when I got licensed for United States Cycling Federation in 1986. And decided, I'm pretty good at this. Let me go race. And this is against civilians, just like in the skydiving is going to be with a civilian type
Right, right. Mhm.
trail also.
Yeah.
And and the first race I did, I actually got whistled off the course because I fell off, and I thought it was pretty strong, and it threw, it stuck a big humble piece of pie in my mouth, and I could have very easily turned around and said, "Oh, this, whatever, it's ain't for me. I'm a Navy SEAL," but I didn't. I looked at it as, man, I just got my butt handed to me. It's like, what am I going to do about it?
Right.
So it was towards the end of the year when that happened, going into winter, where the season kind of ends, and then it picks up again in January, February. And so I went and started doing my intervals and started doing my training related to the racing, the criterium racing I was going to do again in January, February. And the first race I did, coming back into it, I ended up finishing third place. And I started picking people's minds and learning. And I threw a major goal about making the Olympic team in 1988. And, there wasn't that far from the Olympic team of 88. And, some of the older guys that were teaching me about cycling and I was listening to, they were kind of like looking at me once again, almost like the too small to be a SEAL thing. They're looking
Yeah.
at me like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. So I started placing in races and working my way up the categories. And within 6 months, I had become, a state champion and had qualified for the Olympic trials for '88, where I went out there. The SEAL teams, once I had qualified, Navy Sports also allowed me the time to just focus on that for a few months. And I ended up going out to the Olympic trials in '88, where I finished first in our district. It was District 36, Washington, D.C., Virginia. And but I didn't make the Olympic team. I ended up, but I did pretty darn well. I ended up first in state. But then I realized that if I really wanted to pursue cycling, the sport of cycling, I would have to give up my career as a Navy SEAL,
Mhm.
and I wasn't ready to do that.
Yeah.
But I've always been on bikes my entire life. I've always enjoyed riding them, and riding them to a level of punishing myself.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little later about, because I think it's the soul cleansing part, right? And that's, I
Absolutely.
think it gets into that. The Now, it will, as you get into these different sports, the one thing that one comment I've heard that I think applies here is that process is greater than the outcome, or process is really everything, right? Is you can have a goal that's great, but you have to have the discipline to do the process in order to even get close to that goal. Would you agree? And
Absolutely. You have to have the discipline to deal with failure,
yeah,
probably more than anything else.
yeah.
some of my initial failures were some of my greatest successes. And yeah, and it's just too easy to it's just too easy for anybody to give up or convince themselves that that what they really thought they wanted. Oh well, I'll be okay. I see a lot of that with SEAL students and and SEAL students that have quit and
Yep.
things like that. That so it's no, absolutely. You gotta you got if it's not in your heart, forget about it.
Yep.
You got to have. I don't care what it is that you're looking at to want to do. If you want to excel in anything, you got to it's got to be in your heart to the level of no matter what setbacks are thrown at you.
Right. Right. So then as you shift, you got the thought that okay, I don't did pretty good at cycling, but like you said, in order to get to the pinnacle, you're gonna have to give up what you're doing
And
for
my career as a
you're
SEAL.
gonna give up what's primary in your heart. I guess is probably a better way to put it, right?
Yeah.
And then so you got into parachuting. How did you kind of describe some of that? You got
So once again, I never thought about throwing myself out of a plane till I made my first skydive in 19 probably early 83, maybe late 82,
Mhm.
right when I got the UDT 12. So I got free fall qualified and around parachutes at the time.
Yeah.
And immediately, man, after I still remember my first skydive vividly and falling, and it didn't feel like falling, and it's flying, and I really loved it. Thought it was a wonderful thing we did. I always loved to jump, and so I got into it on obviously in the teams I could do it whenever I could and
Mhm.
focus some of my uh, my ability towards being good at that and teaching that. And then I started doing it on the weekends. And once again, here comes the approach of finding the best in the world at it, trying to seek out the best and on my own personal time, sometimes with my own personal money, going and basically improving at that sport. And that's what took me to near 10,000 jumps
Right.
and world records and everything else that I've been a part of. Was wanting to be that good and find the time because I was still doing the SEAL stuff,
Right.
but I guess when I was still I'd still go to the bars and do the bar thing and that, but a lot of times my other free time was spent focusing on goal related stuff that would improve me as a SEAL too because I
Right.
came back with a lot of that and implemented a lot of technology and stuff that we have now in the SEAL teams that at the
Mhm.
beginning was you know uh, it's sometimes maybe it was more than they wanted. People were kind of somewhat a little bit closed-minded, didn't think we needed to go there. And SEALs have always been pretty good about, some better than others about being a little more open-minded on who's better than me and what are they doing and trying to
Yeah,
improve.
I think one of the things that I've really talked about with people on our community is the fact that the level of entrepreneurship is just off the charts because our every problem we have is different. And I think you've already illustrated that on everything you talked about, especially back in with SEAL Team 6 and what you had to think. Everything you do is just different. So you got to think about and ask those knowledgeable in that area to make sure that you're the best at it. This whole shows there's a guided principle. I don't know if you looked in there, but I found a Japanese proverb and it said the guiding principle here is if you wish to know the road, inquire of those who have traveled it.
Absolutely.
And that to me that has guided everything that I've ever done. You're kind of saying the same thing,
Yeah.
so that's pretty cool. Excuse me. So kind of going from there, it kind of taking a little bit from the parachute team stuff. There, you mentioned to me we talked a lot about some of the low points, right? Where you had to deal with some severe grief, if I may
Sure.
say so,
Absolutely.
and then you also had to perform at a level at a world class level. Kind of just tell me some of those stories that you had and what you had to do and how you got through that. Okay.
Yeah, so we had been on a skydive. It was, and I ended up opening my parachute, landed and on the ground, and someone came up to me and said, "Hey, a skydiver went in."
Yeah.
And at that time, I didn't, obviously worry about it too much. I knew my job was to pack my parachute, and 300 people. Who I didn't know who it could be, and within minutes, someone came up to me. They were already crying, and they said they think it's Sandy, which was a close friend of mine. So then I dropped my parachute, figured out where she had, impacted. Went out there, and her husband had already gone out there. Was with the body. Obviously, she was deceased, and though at the time, I knew the family as well as anybody, and them as well as anybody. I knew that my even though I obviously crying inside and hurting inside, I knew my priority number one was to make sure her husband was okay, get him through the night, get him back to the family in Virginia Beach.
Did you sleep at all that night?
Not really, not much.
Right.
And so ended up having to deal with the body, the morgue, and all that process too. But priority number one was to get him on a plane and get him back to the family in Virginia Beach. Managed to do that the next morning. Actually, had to pack up things in the hotel room, everything, so be there with them. With you got all your wife's personal effects and everything else. I put myself in those shoes, and how do you do that?
Right.
So and there I am. So that was the first time I really had to deal with an impact to that level. But I think how I was brought up as a SEAL helped me to do what I had to do. And they got him on a plane early the next morning, and came back to the drop zone because the body was already at the morgue. Had some stuff to do that afternoon. The event organizer said, "Hey Lou, I know what you've been through the last 12 hours. We had a skydiver that we had to pull from one of the positions, and you don't have to do this, but are you willing to make a jump?" And it was the 24th attempt out of 25 at the world record. I thought to myself, what would Sandy want me to do? And I thought to myself, get in that plane. So I got in that plane. The first time I had done that position, everybody else had gotten time to practice their position 20 plus times. And now I had to, from the get-go, visualize what I'd be doing in that slot, fly in, dock, follow people in, fly in, dock, and get it done. And I managed to be able to do what I had to do, and that became the 246 way world record.
Right.
So that a lot more impact on what I had to deal with that, obviously, that night and that morning.
Anything specific that you can point to, either your life or the SEAL teams, that allowed you to have that kind of focus, or was it just a thought of what Sandy would want you to do, kind of, or maybe a mixture of all the above?
It's a mixture of all, but obviously having to deal with something like Hell Week didn't hurt. Having to stay awake for 5 days and freeze my butt off in the cold water and deal with adversity, and I think all that everybody had an impact on. You're expected to failure is not an option, and I think that no matter though failure is a reality, but in the SEAL teams, failure is not an option. So I had to I had to do what I had to do.
Yeah, I love the saying we had then was one evolution at a time.
Yep.
I think that's, to me, that what you're doing now is like, hey, yeah, we had it, but now it's got a job right now.
Absolutely.
You gotta do the job now.
Immediate focus. Focus on what matters, not what doesn't. And that's something that we'll talk a bit more about this later on.
Right.
Here,
I guess we talked about a couple of things grief wise that you were going to talk about. So had Sandy on one. So transition to this next one.
So probably the biggest negative that I think I've ever had to deal with, obviously, in battlefield stuff included, and there's been some stuff that that I've been fed and had to deal with. So that's what you can never know what life's going to throw at you, good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, I was on a training op as a SEAL training, and we were out of town, and I was one of the instructors doing green team, and the command called me, got me on the phone, said, "Louis, we've had something happen. A friend of mine, basically his wife and daughter, once again, that I knew really well, I was super close to this guy, a teammate, were murdered last night.
Yeah, man.
And you got to tell them." And I remember going and finding him, and we were at in a hotel, like doing a conference type thing, and I said, "I need to talk to you, Andy." And so we got him in the elevator. It was going to take, I needed to go up to the room, and I couldn't get him further in the elevator, and he could sense something was going on. And I can still remember that moment, having to tell him that his wife and daughter had been murdered, which I was really close to, as I said. And then once again, now my biggest concern is to make sure that Andy gets back to Virginia Beach. His son survived the attack, so get him to the hospital where his boy survived the attack, and and deal with it from there. And and I showed up, and people, friends and stuff were a wreck. I mean, it was in town and what had happened to them, and so I had to basically just make sure that that Andy was right, that his son was right, and you know, and move on, and resiliency, bounce back.
Right, right. What helped you focus during that time?
Knowing that if I didn't do it, I'm sure somebody would have stepped up to the plate and did what I. And there was a lot of people taking care of Andy
Sure.
also, but there was a lot of people that were just destroyed, and understandably, why. I understand, and so I knew it's like I got to do it. It's me, and step up to the plate and swing the bat, and that's just kind of how it was brought up around a lot of great, wonderful teammates, and that were just what they'd expect me to do.
Those are some powerful stories, Lou, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. I think it really sets the ground, though, for shifting into a little more upbeat stories, if you will. And
Absolutely.
you know me with all the sections I got on this whole show. I'm a little eclectic, as you understand. And so this next section I kind of nicknamed Forrest Gump. All right, so we've all had times in our life and we just literally backed our ass into something that turned out really wonderful. For me, it was Advanced Training Command. Ended up being one of the coolest things I've ever had happen to me, and it was totally unexpected. So, for you, if you got one or two stories of things that you want to talk about that you Forrest
Sure.
Gumped your way into, it turned out to be quite the pearl.
Yeah, as a SEAL, obviously, all we really want to do is operate and get on target at
Yeah,
that. But as you start getting more senior, you start learning that there's other things that you need to be able to do.
yeah.
So leaving SEAL Team Six, when I look after being there over 16 years, when they actually kind of in a way said, you got to go. You're senior enough now. You got to go give back to the community. That was, actually one of them, because it ended up, the things I got to do. One of them being Advanced Training Command, getting to
Mhm.
commission the command as your command master chief.
Yep.
That was obviously, one of those things that was just a blessing, and just I learned so much.
Yeah.
I learned so much as an E9 that leaving SEAL Team Six that I didn't know at SEAL Team Six. I would have never known. It would have never been a completely well-rounded uh, E9 Master Chief. Definitely a Command Master Chief level. So those things, like commissioning a command,
Mhm.
I learned a lot from that. You know, shortly thereafter, after going from there, I ended up, now I'm an E9 and I've got some seniority, and they needed, overnight they needed to stand up the JSOTF, the Joint Special Operations Task Force in Bahrain, and I ended up doing that with Todd Seneff, commissioning that, and standing that up. So being in the Middle East, um, but that was actually in the Middle East. First time I had ever been to the Middle East that wasn't on and off target, within the wire. I think really before that, my time in Iraq with the ICTF, the Iraqi Counter-Terrorist
Mm,
Forces.
yep.
Um, that was an experience that I'll never forget. I mean, taking a unit of 400 plus Iraqi soldiers, that the religion diversification in the unit of Sunni, Shia, and Kurdish guys, all fighting together
Yep.
for Iraq. Being able to go over there and having actually not only a SEAL platoon with me, so basically 30 SEALs, also an SF group, 30 of them, and being able to jointly lead that unit with a major, and being in the command master chief, or as I was known to the Iraqis as command sergeant major, because they knew army rank. Um, but being able to understand their background, I think that really was a plus I had, to understanding what where the Iraqis had come, the history
Mhm.
of that part of the world, how to effectively get into their hearts, not just on and off the battlefield stuff, which um, I knew that as SEALs we just that's what we do, but also what's going to drive these soldiers to actually want to do what they need to do in order to do what they got to do once we're gone, and effectively you know uh, take their country to the level that they want to take it within, and it isn't going to happen overnight. So, getting them to understand that was a challenge, and And I think what I was able to do in those deployments was sometimes, get into their hearts. I joke about it because it's the only time I've ever had when I was leaving where people were literally crying, soldiers were literally crying, was when I left Iraq. I said, I don't think any SEAL platoon's ever been crying because I was leaving. They're glad to see me go. They're like, oh, get over that son of a bitch. Yeah.
El Fuego.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyhow, but yeah, so understanding, I was able to get into their hearts, and they understood that, I was there to try to help.
People that haven't been there probably don't really understand the gravity of Sunni, Shia, and Kurd being mixed and trying to fight as a one fight. So what are some of the things you did to break down, truly intractable barriers according to all the experts? But here's little Lu excelling again.
Yeah, so
getting it in there, right?
getting them to at least rally around, have something to rally around.
Yeah.
We wrote a creed for them. I wrote a creed for them, 6 lines, basically started on a piece of paper. And I'm like, and it was like, a lot of, machismo type lines in it, but one line was religion by choice, united as one.
Awesome.
And I told them that, I let them change it. I didn't want it to be mine, so we made some changes to it, but they wanted to change that one, united under one God. And I looked at them across the table. I had all the leadership, and I said, you're Sunni, you're Shia, and you're Kurdish. And you guys go fight as brothers every night for the freedom of your country, to make your country better. And you love each other as brothers. You're brothers. I said, so the fact that he was raised Shia and you were raised Sunni, and you prayed a little different, it really doesn't matter. You guys know what's good attributes and, good values as a person. And I said, and as long as you got those, who really cares exactly how you pray? And they were, heads up and down, and basically took it on board, and kept that line within their creed, which is pretty darn good impact but at least it was just something that they could rally around, and a start for all the troops to, this is what we believe in. And they it's but it's really not just the Iraqis, it's human nature. If I can really simplify it. People like to gravitate and like to surround themselves with other people that believe, are into the things they're into. You got to remember when you were back as a young child on the playground, you had your clique of friends. And, they were cool. They liked to do the same things you did. You can hang out with each other. A wonderful thing. But the problem started happening when you're looking outside of your clique and going, they're not as cool as me, and they're, they're dorks or whatever. But that's just human nature that we're never going to get away from. So, so being able to be effective and understand that people are going to want to gravitate to people that, have their culture and things like that. Nothing wrong with that. Or even within religion, nothing wrong with all the things that the church and God and things like that offer, the good values. But, but you got to be able to understand that just because they're not wearing the same uniform you are, talking exactly the same things you are, don't go to the same church you go to, or part of the same government group, those things as a person, the good values of the person are the same. And you don't look to the outside and go, if they're not part of my group, they're just not as good as me. And that's a part of human nature that we're never going to get rid of. So we need to basically effectively try to deal with it, because humans are always going to want to gravitate to being a team. It's my team. Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful sports. You put a jersey on and the wrong jersey and walk through a parking lot in the wrong place, you're going to get your what kicked. Because humans like to turn wonderful things when they gravitate around each other into negative against other people. And but that's just part of human nature, and we got to try to obviously get folks to understand it. It's not a great way to be. So we're more civilized. Everything we're talking about, there's nothing new on all the stuff we're talking about. These things on how to mentally approach things. And it's what smart people have been doing for our history. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the negatives have been there for our entire history as mankind. We're more civilized than we've ever been. And, when we think that, people are, in different countries doing, they may not be like this, and their things may be, really, a bit rough if you try, you can't really understand their culture. But the bottom line is where we've come from, as man, we've come a long way. in this world. But obviously there's always going to be room for improvement because, like I said,
Yeah.
human nature is to gravitate to groups.
Right. It don't change very much. That's for darn sure. I
Nope.
think so. Between Advanced Training Command and the Iraqi experience, it sounds like you've really saw you implied mentorship back in your early days, right? And I think moving forward, you really saw the explicit value of mentorship because that's what we had to do at ATC, Advanced
Yep.
Training Command. That's what you obviously had to do with the Iraqis. They wouldn't be crying and leaving otherwise, right? So moving forward, I know you have a lot. You had a couple of things happen. One, as you shifted into civilian life, they made you, the guy for mentorship at the center, right? And also you're doing mentorship out here with the locals in Lake Havasu. So if you take a second and really kind of think about and describe the value, or kind of walk us through Buds as you're becoming the king mentor, if you will, and then how it impacted you out here. So kind of go along with that.
So I've always been taught that to learn something, take it to the level of performance. Highest
Yeah.
level of performance I can, whatever the subject is. But I also wanted people to be as good at it as I am or better.
Yeah.
So I've always been. It came naturally for me to teach, and I was put in situations as a younger SEAL at 21 years of age. I was basically sent with with a master chief as one my mentor did, and he just basically sent me, and we went and taught the FBI HRT, Hostage Rescue Team. So here I am teaching guys that are old enough to be my dad, and had to teach them, on a subject. And that master chief said, "You got it. You put together the trip. You make it happen." So in a way, been forced to be put out there and teach from a very young age.
Yeah.
So it started becoming just a natural part of me.
Yeah.
With everything I did, if I could help somebody improve at what they do, um, I was there to do. Anytime I could, give you a concise, non-confusing instruction to get you headed in the right direction. I've been doing it, and I did it for 35 years, and started realizing that that I had the ability to understand what directions to go with different people, and being able to change up my approach and be effective because everybody's different.
Yep.
And that's a big part of being a leader or being a coach or being a mentor. And yet you got to be able to understand what's going to drive that person. You got to figure out what gets into their heart, and,
Yeah, so,
and it's an art.
Yeah. So think about, with the director of mentorship there at Buds, you talked about the whole man concept. Why don't you go through a little bit of that and how that impacted that program?
Yeah. So that program, it had already kicked off a bit, and then I ended up, kind of taking it over at pretty much near the beginning of this thing. And what I thought to myself is, what are the things that people, without using the title mentor, that were my mentors, what did I learn through my 30 years of being a SEAL, that I wish I would have been told at the beginning. And a lot of it became things that weren't exactly battlefield SEAL related things, because I knew those are the things we love, and man, guys are gonna. I didn't have to worry about that. Guys are gonna get taught that stuff,
Right.
Perfectly.
Yep.
But there were other things that were being missed, and and the whole man concept, whole person concept, because it really is not gender specific. Truly, it's being able to do what you got to do on the battlefield, and take another human's life for all the right reasons. Turn around within a day, put on a suit, be a total professional, roll into an embassy, to use an example,
Right.
or come home a few days later, rejoin your family, and go coach Little League. So being that whole human, that whole person concept, that is easier said than done. So that's what was my focus, was being able to teach things that would get these guys to understand, relationships and family, finances, basically, but very to the point, because those are a lot of times the times that, and you knew as a CO,
Mhm.
a lot of times 80% of the time that we were having to deal with things, it was the negatives of what troops were doing that wasn't right. So that's what I ended up focusing on, was basically on building that complete person on and off the battlefield. There was always something I heard in our community, throughout the years. but he's a good operator.
The butt.
But he's a good operator. And that justified the guy could be a hell of a shooter. He could be, a really great dude on target. The first guy you'd want to take combat with you. But the butt part, there was something else missing there. And there was something else where the guy was going to derail. But you could hear that with, and we hear it a lot in life where Buddy's a good worker. Buddy's a good ball player. But the butts are everywhere. And I think my approach was figuring out how to fix the butt. And there's not just one way to stamp it out. It's and the person's got to want to be that complete, well-rounded person, but that's what we're after. And let me say this right now. I mean, I'm talking to myself right now when I'm saying these things. It's never ending. Right. And I'm listening to everything I'm saying. And that's, and I think those things are what's helped me in life, but very to the point on some of these virtues and values.
You said there were 6 things you wanted the guys to remember. What were those 6 things?
So this is interesting, because, our first thing you got to understand the audience you're teaching to. And most of us A-type personality folks have attention deficit. If you don't, and I'm not even going to use the word disorder, it's just what we do, what we are.
Yes. Ooh, look at that cool thing.
Yeah, exactly. And if we're into it, man, we're all about it. We're focused. We're locked on. But if it's something that we're not having that much interest in, it's going to be in one ear and out the other. So first of all, being able to lock on and understand that. So to build this, we had an ethos that we put together in 2005. Wonderful document.
Yep.
9 paragraphs. It's available, on the internet. You can pull it up. Mm-hmm. You could take the word SEAL out of that ethos and put yourself as a person, and everything applies to us as humans. But I understood that the boys are, they're kind of, they're not into the wordy stuff, and some of them liked it more than others. I mean, but there's no denying it was an incredible document. And sometimes I'd even have admirals talking about the ethos and, mentioning the ethos during their speech, but they really weren't giving anybody something to take out of there with them, other than they're not going to go look up the document and read it like you think they are, or memorize it like you think they would. No. So I thought to myself, well, with our attention deficit mugs, I said, what am I, it was founded on 6 attributes. So 6 words. So I would tell the students from day one, SEALs, instructors, you name it, SEALs, can I get you to just remember 6 words? Not the whole ethos. That's a good fallback and read it, know what it's in there, but 6 words. And I get you just to remember 6 words. Is that too much? And most of the time would be like, no, Master Chief. I'm like, and it's not about Master Chief wanting to memorize, you get you to memorize these words. It's not a memorization drill. It's an application drill. And those words were physical courage. Basically doing things that can scare you, you're frightened of, you're afraid to fail, being able to take that chance. But also the big one of physical courage is the physical courage to also tell a friend, somebody that's close to you, that they're doing something wrong in a smart way. And maybe sometimes getting to the point where they dislike you or even hate you, but you tried to get them right. So physical courage. Moral courage, which is integrity. Yeah. And it's nothing new. I mean, from the time we were little kids.
Right. None of this is.
Doing the right thing when nobody's looking. Yep. And that's as a SEAL too. I mean, you're on target, you're pulling the trigger, you're making the call. I used to tell them, you might even get away with what you did, but you won't get away with it in your heart. So you'll know. Even though you could write it up as whatever, so getting these guys, I don't want them to hesitate or anything, but doing it for the right reasons, and doing things like when you're at a bar or whatever, and their personal lives, when nobody's looking, and you can, and you're dealt with one of those situations, what are you going to do with it? Humility, part of our ethos was, I do not advertise the nature of my work, nor seek recognition for my actions. That's probably one of the reasons why I've done 35 years, 16 years at Team 6, and till now, right. You haven't seen me on a podcast. Yeah. I've kept it pretty exclusive, and I kept it, but I'm trying my best not to talk about anything classified. We're talking about things that help other people.
Right.
So on that note, basically, humility also, the American people have the right to know what we do. Mm-hmm. To a point. And books need to be written within a certain time frame. But to start writing books and start talking about what we did within 1 year of the operation, just not what we do. So it's one of those things. I got it, and not to take anything away from anybody and the wonderful things these warriors have done, but it's just not how I was brought up as a SEAL. To be unsung. I mean, that's why I've disappeared into the desert. Um, my mentorship has continued for whether it's a 3-year-old kid or a professional athlete or a corporation, and I've found that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about right now is relative to everybody.
Absolutely. That's why we're
So,
talking about it.
so
Right?
and
Yeah.
humility,
Yeah.
like I said at the beginning, being that kid that didn't look like a SEAL,
Yeah.
kind of was some forced humility on me. And it was a good thing, and so I've always, I was a cocky young SEAL like anybody else in my 20s. Little by little, I've learned it's better to shut up and make things happen than it is to talk a lot and not do the walk. So the fourth attribute
Yeah.
is creativity. Obviously, being able to seek out people that are better than you, basically seek out, folks who can teach you something and take things and learn from them and develop it. So and being able to always seek out knowledge, but also that being said, the basics when it comes to creativity, still all the fancy stuff won't get you anywhere unless you can apply the basics first.
Mm.
And I don't care what the subject is. If you took, if you pick any subject, if you took the 10 best books ever written on leadership and read them from cover to cover and then pulled out 5 to 10 bullets out of each of those books, at the end of reading all 10 of those books, the bullets across the board would be the same. And those are the basics of leadership. So having the knowledge is a wonderful thing. Then if you could just take those basics on whatever that subject is and apply them, and that's where people have a lot of knowledge in their head, and the academian approach is a wonderful thing. But if you can't take the knowledge itself and actually apply it, it's not going to do you that good. So being able to be creative, taking it to a certain level, and then but always falling back on the basic. When it comes to SEAL tactics, we all know that that we can. And I saw this at in the SEAL teams that we would always be trying to develop our tactics to do things a bit better. But at sometimes the tactics when the bullets started flying, we'd always have to fall back on the solid basics, online, L shape. So a lot to be said, whether you're a SEAL doing that or a golfer, basically starts with your swing and making contact with the ball. Or I could go on basic finances. How much do I make? How do I save it? How do I spend it? So those things, interesting. But creativity is one of them, and then the other one is team ability. Not even a real word. I think we just pulled that one out of our who knows what. But being teamwork, we're all about teamwork in the SEAL teams, and I have these things called Louisms. My wife calls them that, and one of them is the old KISS principle, and there's keep it simple, and there's nothing stupid about it. Keep it simple and smart. So when it comes to teamwork too, it's being able to understand that another one is that there's no I in the word team, and I disagree with that. Teamwork truly starts with I, with you doing your job, playing your position in order to benefit the team. Sometimes a position may not even be the one you want to be in or be playing, but it's the one you need to be playing at the time for the team. So understanding that if you don't play your position correctly, your team isn't going to be as effective, and a lot of times somebody's going to have to pick up the things you're missing on. So team ability, and the last one is resiliency, and we've talked about a lot of negatives. So no matter what life throws at you, it's the ability to bounce back, and find that that silver lining, no matter how bad it is, whether it's a death in a family or whatever. Moving forward, I talked about my friend's wife and daughter being murdered. He's still a very close friend of mine. He ended up years later remarrying. His son grew up to be a wonderful man. He's in the Air Force, firefighter. So you move forward with whatever you're given. So we've talked about bouncing back no matter what the negative, And I think it's really important to understand how wonderful, how great we have it in this wonderful country, especially from a Cuban immigrant. Everything that I know and I owe to this country, and understanding that no matter how bad it gets, relative to what it is in some other places of the world, we got it made. I mean, no matter how poor and you know you are in this country, I mean, you could always get found potable water, a meal, clothes, which those are luxuries in some places I've been in the world.
Right.
So I always try to remind myself sometimes when I think things are pretty negative. I try to remind myself that it just ain't that bad. I mean, truly happiness is relative to the individual. I've been to the poorest of countries and seen the biggest smiles on kids' faces.
That's a
Whether
fact.
they're
Yep.
climbing a tree, riding a donkey, throwing jerk clods at each other, they're happy as can be. And I see because I spend a lot of time around kids here, because trying to help them learn some of the things I have here. And you get kids that are upset about the most menial of things. I don't know, crazy things like they didn't get the latest version of a smartphone, or it's devastating.
Yeah.
So anyhow, it's interesting because definitely happiness is relative to the individual.
Absolutely. So that's a good shift as well. So I always talk to people about, I didn't learn to surf until I was 30. And growing up, for me, but even then, I always had something that allowed me to have a purpose outside of whatever job it was I was doing. So growing up is all about hiking, hunting, shooting, kind of like you, right? But when I found surfing at the age of 30, I found something that really truly gets to me both literally and metaphorically. What I mean by that is it cleanses my soul. Okay, if I can have the worst day in the world, but if I can get out into the water, even if I don't even have a great session, but if I can get out in the water, it'll wash me outside and inside as well. And I come out of the water, life is still pretty darn good no matter how bad that day could be. So I kind of want to get into some of your mentorship you talked about with guys who are retiring. For yourself, what's a lose soul cleansing thing, and also how do you talk to people to help them transition from that go job into post job life?
So mental performance and trying to control your mind, and deal. Your mind could be your best friend or your worst enemy. A lot of times, it's your worst enemy when it comes to the humans.
Right.
So understanding what do you put in place to keep yourself in check. And like I said, everything I'm saying right now, I'm talking to myself.
Right.
And I've learned that from the practical side of and there's no stamped out just do this and everybody can just do this written in a book and you'll be good to go. You got to figure out what drives you. Personally, what I've found that really drives me, obviously, is teaching what I've learned. I find when I've been able to give another person, kid, child, adult, something that they actually that helped them improve or help them be better at something. I find a lot of joy in seeing people with a smile on their face. A lot of the stuff I coach with kids and stuff like that, I could care less if they're standing on a podium with a trophy. The fact that they are out there doing it, completing, getting it done with a big smile on their face, that really drives me. And a lot of people are very thankful that that I'm willing to do these things. My wife and I are willing to do these things. But truly, it's to our benefit too, because it gets us engaged, gets us focused, and keeps me driving the mission. I'm still, after 35 years of being a SEAL, I have not changed my career almost at all. I'm still mentoring. I'm still talking the same things. It's just to other people from 2-year-old kids through adults and professionals. And the kids are always they're great.
I got to put out a plug for this. This thing is the coolest little checklist for kids and adults. By the way, some of the things there are: plan ahead, be on time. If you have an emergency or can't make it, call a coach. I mean, little life lessons, and I'm going to steal it from him, just so you know. But that's so cool, so cool. Keep going. Sorry.
So what's interesting is that's just whether you're coaching a little league team or a professional organization, just having a few things that you could all tie into as a team. Yeah. It's not about Wes and it's not about Lou. It's like what does our team believe in? Yeah. And you let them you can canvas people and figure out what they are, but just keep them simple to 5 to 10 of things, and they're right in front of your employees guide. They're part of your corporation. They're at the beginning of the moment you hire them, and the cool thing about it is when you have like that card laminate, and they show up to practice, the kids, and I do it with whether it's kids or corporation, have something that you carry with you
Yeah.
that talks about the no kidding to the point values of our company or our team. And the cool thing about that is when they start missing it, and we all miss it from day to day,
Yep.
you can a lot of times fall back on, hey, pull out your card, check it out. All right, number 4. Some of you guys didn't have the equipment you needed tonight. Is that on your card? Absolutely. So it takes it off of being personal back to the team. And I think that really, and I got to tell you, it's a card I carry with the kids. But man, in a major corporation, if you got at least you hired them on 3 to 5 virtues, and you told them at the beginning, asked them what those things mean to them, and when things by chance start going slightly south, and you got to counsel somebody or whatever, and you go, hey, remember those 3 words? Like I go back to our 6 attributes because I did this with SEALs. You remember those 6 words we talked about at the beginning? And sometimes, I'd have soldiers in front of me at a captain's master or whatever, he had done something wrong. And I said, what were they? And they couldn't even recite to me the 6 words that our ethos was founded on. When I said, can you remember 6 words?
Yeah.
And I would tell them what they were and what they meant. And every time they did something incorrect or correct, they were part of those attributes. But a lot of times the incorrect stuff, the wrong stuff, was always one of those 6 words. So keeping it simple, keeping it to the point. That's where that card, I think, no matter what you're doing in life, whether you're raising kids or whatever, the basics and not overloading people sometimes with too much that isn't going to be applied.
Cool. So then shifting back into we talked about the guys who are going to retire. So how do you help those guys and gals when they get ready to hey, I'm going to go hang out on the porch? How do you keep them from going south?
So what I've had the opportunity to do and learn a lot from it was once, you're basically, like I said, we all have post-traumatic stress, first of all, as SEALs. You're trained in it from day one of training, and it's something that's been around and you learn to deal with it. And how do you deal with it? And, some of us deal with it better than others. And we talked about basically finding something that drives you. So the really important thing is once you're out of the military or, headed to another direction, another career path, trying to still find something that drives you in that next career path or that future, and figuring out with yourself, what do I need to do or not do in order to keep myself in check? And I could tell people, alcohol is one of these things that, whether you drink a little or drink a lot, you got to figure it out. And, some people don't even need to, and that's just an example. It could be drugs, it could be a lot of things that are addictions. I know you can figure out, if you're okay with it and not fooling yourself, or you can basically, figure out maybe I need to get away from that. So moving into the next career, you got to keep focusing on something that drives you. And I think, like I tell these guys when they retire me, because I've had I've spent a decent amount of time with even really high-end professional athletes and retired folks. And I usually tell them that when they really need me, when they are really going to need to call me, is not after you retire from the military. Not that they couldn't. I mean, I'll give them whatever advice I got, whatever it's worth, into the next career path. Not even then, but when you decide to really, I've made enough to retire, and now I'm going fishing. And that's when finally you're at home. You can't be at home staring at white walls and watching crazy TV programs and drinking and things like that. You got to get engaged. You got to keep engaged, especially when you have the personality like we do.
Yep.
And my engagement has been giving back.
Yeah.
It's like I could be around, like all of us. We all talk about the news and things that we dislike and how we're going to fix the world. I'm around a lot of folks in their 70s and 80s, and not that I mind those conversations, but I ask myself in my head as I'm having that conversation in the morning around coffee or something, it's what have I actually done for this world at the end of this conversation? And really, it ain't much. So for
lowered
me,
blood pressure maybe, but
yeah. So for me, it's like giving back. Giving back with kids that are future of our country. So giving back with kids or having to, if I could give back on somehow helping an adult, or a kid to improve, great. And obviously my big focus is kid because I'd rather spend the time teaching a kid the right way than have to fix a broken adult.
Right.
So,
but everybody's got to figure out their own, right? Everybody's got to figure out what that is.
But
it's the biggest challenge.
But a retirement, yeah, I mean that's the big one. At the end of that, whatever it might be, life goes on, and you got to find a new focus, whether it's you're something you're into, a hobby, so keep you busy during the week. I'm still on the schedule. I knew that I could operate better on somewhat of a schedule. I ride so many times a week. I do stuff with the kids. I fish a couple of nights a week. And it's stuff I want to do and like to do, but I've still found that it's better to keep myself, engaged in doing something. My wife appreciates it too.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how fast that day goes if you don't put something down on paper and what time you're going to do it. Right. Yeah.
So I'm really thankful, this whole thing, I got that 35 years of being able to do this stuff. I've learned a lot. A lot of everything's practical. I never thought I'd be telling world-class psychologists on teaching them about mind performance and mental toughness, but it was stuff that I've had to live, and I've been really fortunate to be around wonderful people like yourselves and learn from a lot of different folks throughout my life, and until the day I die, I'll keep doing what I'm doing now, hopefully.
Okay, so with that, you've taught me a lot. And I like this for our viewers, kind of give us your top 3 scars and why they're your top 3.
Top 3 scars, if I had to leave you with something, first of all, one is lead by example. Nothing matters unless you're doing it. Put yourself out front and show people that you're still willing to do the things right along with them. You're never too good. You're never too special to take out the trash.
Right.
I think that's important. The other one is application. Apply, learn, take in the knowledge, read, do whatever, it's going to, get it in your head, but then you got to take that knowledge and apply it. So apply. And the third one, no matter how miserable it might be, the comfort always returns. The comfort always returns. It might be for an hour that you're at the gym, and God, I got to go there tonight. But always afterwards, sooner or later, you'll be back eating that meal, back in that shower or laying in bed, and you'll be much happier that you did what you did, that discomfort. You spent that hour or 2 hours doing that. And it could be an hour, it could be 2 hours, it could be a day, it could be a week. Like I told the young man during Hell Week, that, a week from now, and getting it to that point where sooner or later you'll be back in that shower, in that bed, but comfort always returns. Make yourself live with a little misery, as I'll leave you with that too. Get out there, make yourself uncomfortable, put yourself in situations that make you uncomfortable. It helps you to deal with things when confronted with, negative things. So the comfort always returns.
Excellent. Hey, Lou, before we sign off here, I want to ask you if there's any organizations or anything else you want to plug for the viewers out there to maybe get some extra support, or anything else you want to kind of highlight that you're doing just to kind of make people aware of it, and maybe, like I said, get some support for you out there.
Sure. Any of the benevolent type organizations that are out there. I'm not going to we've got a couple in the SEAL teams, and they're all wonderful. They all do, great stuff for our troops. So, really not to plug a single one, but there's a lot of them out there that definitely, some of these troops coming home and what they're dealing with, it's greatly appreciated when people can, donate and turn funds towards those things that help our guys improve. But anything that improves, a child or a kid's well-being, just so any of those things would be fine with me.
Okay, outstanding. Other than that, brother, thank you so much. You're awesome still, and I'm definitely coming back in the springtime. We'll do some bass fishing, and you can show me how it's done, because I want to learn from the master. And I've actually never bass fished. I've done a lot of fishing. I've never fished for bass, so that would be really cool. But thanks again.
Absolutely.
And
my pleasure.
All the best to you.
My pleasure. Thank you.